What's up, everyone? We're going to go through IB Applications 1, Mathspace Week 7, Most Missed Problems. So we're going to talk about numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5. So let's get into it with number 1, where we have the graph of log base 5 of x, and we're being asked which of the following statements is correct. Either it has a horizontal asymptote, a vertical asymptote, or no asymptotes. So remembering that all logarithmic functions have a vertical asymptote would be helpful. If you don't remember that fact, then you can also just look at your graph. If you notice how on the left-hand side, this becomes almost parallel with the y-axis. That means I have a vertical asymptote at x equals 0. Versus looking on the right-hand side of my graph, since that's where a horizontal asymptote would be, extending this out slowly but surely, it would increase. It doesn't at any point look like it would become completely horizontal. So that's why you can also say that this has a vertical asymptote. Question number 2 says, consider the function log base 4 of x graphed below. And we are trying to figure out which one of these graphs represents the inverse of that function. So remembering that inverses reflect over the line y equals x, which I will try to draw in here. And if I reflect my function over that line, if I sketch it in, it would look something like this. So they're asking me for what is just the inverse. What is that inverse going to look like? So I want to look through my multiple choice options for just my pink graph or something that looks like it. So looking at letter A, no, my graph should increase left to right a little more rapidly than that. That almost looks like my original. Letter B is looking promising. Looks like an exponential graph. Letter C has both pieces. This is a rational function. And letter D saying it doesn't have an inverse function at all, which isn't true. We know the inverse of all logs are exponentials, and exponentials are functions. So that means I'm looking at letter B. Question number 4 asks us to find the domain of the log of 4x plus 8, and we're stating our answer as an inequality. So it's probably easiest to graph this. I'm going to graph it in Desmos first. And Desmos, as we know, graphs log functions way easier than, or way better than the TI calculator, that I can clearly see where this vertical asymptote is, that it's at x equals -2. And that's important because my domain depends on that and the direction of the graph. So in this case, since I'm going to the right of -2, I could say that my domain is x is greater than -2, never including the asymptote there. If I were to graph this in my TI calculator, the graph itself doesn't come up as good as Desmos, but you can also look at the table and you're looking for the first x value that gives you an error in the table. You can also do this algebraically, that you can take the piece that's in parentheses. I'm going to take that 4x plus 8, and if you set it equal to 0 and solve for x, it will get you the equation of the vertical asymptote. And then you can just kind of use your basic knowledge of what does a log look like to know, is it greater than -2 or less than -2? From our graph, we know that x is greater than -2. Finally, question number 5, finding the domain of log of -2x, again, stating our answer as an inequality. All right, so we can again graph this. I'll use Desmos just because of ease. If I graph this, it shows me it's been reflected over the y-axis, and I could tell that just from the negative inside the parentheses as well. And that also shows me that my vertical asymptote is at x equals 0. So this time I am less than 0, or less than my vertical asymptote. Again, I could do this without Desmos or my calculator at all and just say, first, what is my vertical asymptote by setting what's in parentheses equal to 0 and solving for x. And then paying attention to that negative sign, knowing that normal log functions look like this, or my parent function looks like this, but that negative sign will reflect it over the y-axis, meaning it would look like this instead, or something like that. But either way, I can say that my domain is x is less than 0. Remember, you're never including the number here because of the asymptote.